On today's show, Trudeau thinks Canada has too many guns. The Supreme Court thinks mass murderers serve too much time. And we live in a culture in which a man can become a woman. We take a look at the history of transgender ideology. This is Penhold Talk Radio. And we're back. Thank you for joining us again this week. If you're a regular listener, thank you for returning. And if you are a first-time listener, you stumbled across us, thank you for coming along. Unlike your cable and cell phone providers, we provide the same service at the same price for everybody. So thank you. Thank you for coming along. My name is Brian Constantine, and the jokes do not get any better than this. My co-host is here, Michael Rowland.
Hello, hello.
And with that intro, let's get into the local news. And right off the hop, and I know because we took off last week, this is a little bit old news, so I'm sorry, Calgary Flames fans, if I'm ripping off the Band-Aid a little bit. But it was, I think it was last Thursday, that the Edmonton Oilers defeated the Calgary Flames in Game 5 of their second round playoff.
Just got to reopen that wound for
them. That's
right.
This is one benefit of being a Leafs fan. I have no compunction about getting after any other team because everyone teams up against the Leafs fan. So I have no problem with that.
Just morally. Enjoy watching them lose.
Yeah. Now I bring this up first to mention, yes, it was a goal. I know you're probably not sure what that means, but that's okay.
Nope.
The Calgary Flames fan, no, and I'll go with them. That was a goal. That was not a distinct kicking motion. I'll show you the replay later on, and you can tell me if you see a distinct kicking motion. Because that seems to conjure up certain images when you think of a distinct kicking motion, correct?
Yeah.
Like usually a swing at the knee or something like that, right? Driving something. Yeah, no, that did not happen. But anyways, so that should have been a good goal. That said, Flames were not going to win that series. The Oilers were just too good, or the Flames were just too bad, however you want to look at it. But so ripping that Band-Aid off, I brought it up because I want to put Councillor Walsh on the spot here and alert everyone else that he did have a bet with Mayor Yargeau, and this was instigated by Walsh. So that's what I mean. I don't have any problem.
He went in with a lot of confidence and lost the bet.
Yeah. And so his agreement, the bet was that now Walsh has to wear an Oilers jersey to a council meeting.
So people need to make sure that there's pictures of this.
Yes. Yeah.
Because Walsh will just love sarcasm, having that picture floating around for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. If there are no pictures, it doesn't happen. That's the general rule. So maybe this drives audience to June 13th. This is their next council meeting. So at least this is the first opportunity he has to make good on that bet. So June 13th, that might be a big day for council meeting if you're tuning into it. All right, so we've put him on notice. All right, so and then around town as well, we got the spring clean is wrapping up. This is basically where Penhold gets rid of 25% of its material goods, I believe, something like that.
Everybody in town just accumulates all their large garbage that you can't stick in the bin for the whole year, and then come the end of May, beginning of June, we all haul it down and dump it in the big, huge C-can bins that they bring out for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Where I grew up, we had we were out, it was Big Lake, BC, if you want to look it up. And where we lived there, you didn't have garbage services because that was ridiculous. We only had a general store, and that was to cover like the general area. Because there's no subdivisions, just everyone out in the woods. But anyways, our dump was consistent. So if you wanted to get rid of your garbage, you basically drove to where the landfill, the little mini landfill was, which was constituted of a big, huge trench that was dug out and then filled in all the time. And I bring that up because it was also known as Big Lake's shopping mall.
So I miss those days. I remember that as a kid too, where you'd go to the landfill, you had to take stuff to the landfill, and usually you'd come back with a bunch of things too.
Yeah.
It's like a free secondhand store.
Yeah, I know. Like, why is someone throwing that out? That's perfectly good. I needed that. Or at least, a pick apart kind of thing, right?
Oh yeah, my dad was into woodworking, and the amount of stuff that contractors would just toss in the landfill, and my
Sure.
dad could basically fill up the back of the vehicle with a bunch of nice scrap wood for building projects.
There are some very resourceful people out there.
Don't get caught doing that now. They definitely frown upon it. You're not supposed to leave the landfill with stuff.
But anyways, that's a little bit of nostalgia for me. Every time I see that pop up every year with all the appliances and old barbecues and and bicycles, it reminds me of the old Big Lake shopping mall. But anyways, that's wrapping up. I think if I'm on the ball, this should be coming out on the last day, isn't it?
I think it goes till Monday.
Oh, Monday, June 6th, I guess.
I think they go to June 6th.
So June 6th.
You got the rest of the weekend.
All right. So you got the rest of the weekend to get rid of all that stuff in order to make room for the stuff that you'll be throwing out next year.
Yeah.
All right. And then a couple more things. This is a little bit self-serving here because I'm involved in it. But the Penhold Library has an announcement. In fact, some big news that they're going to be making on June 8th. And so they set this up as an event. You can come out to the library and hear what our little town library is up to and doing and getting recognized for. And we there's something that is worth celebrating for this library. And most people here, I imagine, have had some interaction or experience with our library. In
Especially
fact, I know people even outside of Penhold know about Penhold Library.
Oh, especially anybody with kids. Like the library's desire to have programming for the kids as well as the older people, but especially the kids, it draws people in from everywhere.
Yeah.
I know people that come in from Red Deer because there's just nothing quite like the small town Penhold Library and all the work they put in.
Yeah. And of course, again, shout out to Myra for all the leadership and the initiative that she pushes in and to getting the library into the center of the community as much as she does. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think this is an event that you might want to check out. June 8th at 11 a.m. Some big news going to be happening at the library. And then finally, I know there's other events, but I think we'll mention this one. Ma and Pa's Bakery, they got a show and shine happening on June 1st. And
July 1st.
Sorry, July 1st. July 1st, Canada Day. Yes. Yeah, thank you for backing me up. I'd be sending people everywhere on the wrong day. Yes. So July 1st, they got show and shine. I think they got petting zoo coming up. They got bouncy castles going up. So they've gone the full.
Yeah, they're really going all out
here. I think they asked for permission to shut down or close down a good section of Windsor Ave there that goes in front of the store there for all the vehicles. So yeah, they're going to be running that Friday, July 1st from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. So it's going to be a barbecue fundraiser for Bosco, which is kind of an animal service or animal assisted therapy service in Alberta. They provide service animals.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this is something to put on your radar. And then, of course, July 1st, also the town is putting on things. I believe most of this is going to be happening at the Lincoln Rec Center.
Right. Yeah, they usually do it there.
Yeah. And so I know for sure the PYC, so this is the Penhold Youth Club, is going to be doing their pancake breakfast out there at the Lincoln Street Rec Center. So yeah, lots of stuff going on as usual in this town. And all of it, I must say, is Vax Pass free and mask free. You don't have to show any vaccine requirements. You don't have to mask up. And I mentioned that because apparently you still have to in the House of Commons. So that's my segue. So I believe the House of Commons is pretty much one of the last bastions that's kind of doing this whole Vax Pass place or thing. And I mentioned that because it was just today, as of the recording, that the conservative MP Kathy Wagenthal was escorted politely out of House of Commons for not having a verified vaccine or not being verified vaccine record. Let's put it that way. And then so she was escorted, and I also mention this because it was just this last week that the federal government continued to institute their mask and vaccine requirements for all travel,
Right.
federally regulated travel. Again, we are like one of the last countries that still has this.
Yep.
Australia, which basically went into a penal colony state again, they're back. Unvaccinated people can travel again. Italy, one of the hardest hit ones, they're all good. They have no more travel restrictions. Yet in Canada, you still cannot get on a train, a plane, a ferry.
Public buses still apply, don't they?
If they're federally regulated, and then there's still some municipalities that might require that. But yeah, federally regulated travel, all that you still need to have some proof of vaccine in you. You still have to mask up in that when you're on the planes or boats or trains. And you still have to go through get negative tests when you come and go.
Right. Yep.
And so going back to Kathy Wagenthal, she's an MP from Saskatchewan.
Right.
Well, most of the time, if she wants to so for the last few months, I forget how long the article said, she's been traveling by road, driving from Saskatchewan to Ottawa to get back to her constituency and then back to Ottawa.
Yeah.
Because she can't get on a plane in Canada.
That's
It's
crazy.
absurd. It's absurd.
Especially when you look at the numbers and the hospitalizations and stuff now. It doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not as far as the risk level. Like risk of getting it.
Yeah, and
spreading it, I guess.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's even just as last week Trudeau came out and said we're still in the pandemic. Well, okay, even if I agree with you that we're still in the pandemic, which hard to say that we are, particularly compared to where we were. The thing is, it's not the fact that we're in pandemic or not, it's whether or not your public health policy is impacting that pandemic at all.
Yeah.
You just can't say, oh, we got a pandemic. Okay, let's just automatically flip a switch and you can't fly unless you're vaccinated. That's not how that works. I think, especially since we have a charter right to free travel within Canada, that's in the Constitution. You have to show that there's justifiable grounds that your health policy is still required. You just can't show pandemic and all of a sudden get like a magic hand wave of whatever health policy you want. But anyways, we were still in that state. I have no idea when we are coming out of it. And yeah, this is why people gotten up in arms even back in February. There's no reason why it needs to be in place anymore.
Yeah,
but it still is. You can surmise why our federal government might want to keep that going.
But here in Penhold, attend events. They're not going to ask for it.
Nope. Anywhere, go enjoy your life. All right, so we're gonna stick on the kind of the federal side of things for some more Canada news. Now, no doubt, most of our listeners are familiar with the two tragic shootings that have made the news down in the States over these last 4 weeks. The first one in Buffalo, and the more recent one at the school in Uvalde, and of course, each of these events are tragic and need to be investigated for what can be done to prevent such things from happening. There's no disagreements when it comes to that. What ends up happening, or I shouldn't say tragically, and what ends up happening, unfortunately, is that politicians have this mentality that something must be done and we must do it like now.
Yeah, there's such a reactionary effect there where as soon as an event like that happens, politicians want to show that they are caring and going to do something. And the more long-term solutions to resolve mental health issues or things like that don't present on the spot.
Yeah, it doesn't get the headlines.
No, so that's where they start yelling out things about gun control and all these solutions like that, because that's something where you can write a law and immediately start banning things or making more things illegal or more things difficult to do. And it's a very instant reactionary response.
Yeah, it provides the politician to say, "See, we did something. Look over here." And yeah, that is what the federal government up here has done in reaction to what the U.S. has done or happened in the U.S.
Despite the fact that our gun laws are dramatically different.
So different. Yeah, I think the National Post pointed out how reactionary Trudeau is to stuff that is happening in the States, like as well, even the whole Roe v. Wade happens, and he promises to protect human or women's reproductive health rights up here. Well, the Roe v. Wade is not going to change anything up here.
He seems to think of Canada as another state, and he's just the governor of Canada as a state, like, because he does react to events and occurrences in U.S. law as if somehow ours is on par and needs the same adjustment.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
No, yeah, we are vastly different in legislation and cultural perspective on many of these issues.
Yeah.
But yes, and so on the heels of these public or publicized shootings, I'll mention publicized because we throw myself off track here, but there are so many other shootings that go on that don't get publicized that really highlight a shift that needs to be more, or that needs to take more, or needs to take place at a foundational level. But anyways, the politicians must do something. And so up here, again, reacting to what's going on in the States as if it's the same thing that could happen up here. The federal politicians and the Liberals in particular have tabled a new legislation regarding firearms. And it has, I guess there's 4 main components that have been kind of highlighted out of this. First, and the main one, is a freeze on all handgun purchases, imports, and transfers. So basically, he's, as Trudeau puts it, he's putting a cap on any handguns up here, the handgun amount. I laugh because I'm already thinking, oh shoot, the smugglers are going to go, shoot, there's a cap in Canada, we can't bring any more in. But of course not. They're going to limit long gun magazines to 5 rounds. Again, you'll be thankful that, so when someone breaks into your house, they will only have 5 rounds and no handguns because they always follow these rules. I'm building in my critique as I go through my summary. I can't help it. Sorry. I don't know if this is part of the bill itself, but they've promised to get the buyback of these quote assault or military style assault rifles. They're going to start a buyback program for that by the end of the year.
Yeah, and that makes no sense. The way they identify a gun as an assault weapon or a military style weapon, it doesn't make sense at all.
No, if it looks scary and military-ish, I guess.
If it's black and you use a pistol grip instead of the butt stock style grip, it's suddenly military style.
Those are much more dangerous. And then there's going to be changes to red flag laws. And so these are laws that citizens can go to the police and say this person has a mental health issue, or if someone has a history of domestic abuse. They'll be strengthening some of those. I think there's already a number of red flag laws on the books. So this would be, I guess, an increase on that. And so Trudeau, in announcing this bill, here's a quote for him. It says that we recognize that the vast majority of gun owners use them safely and in accordance with the law. But other than using firearms for sport shooting and for hunting, there is no reason anyone in Canada should need guns for their everyday lives. So there's a couple of things I want to go through. And the first is that, as you mentioned, there's a vast difference between gun ownership and acquisition in Canada versus that in the States.
Getting a gun, well, okay, once you've got your licenses, getting a gun isn't hard, but getting that license in Canada is an arduous process. You have to go take a government approved firearm safety course. And then if you want to get a handgun, you have to do additionally the restricted firearm safety course. Once you've done that course, then you can register or you can apply for your license, but that application goes to the chief firearms officer in Canada, and there is, last I heard, the delay was somewhere in the range of about 5 to 6 months before you'll get your license.
Wow.
They require, I believe, 2 references that they will contact. And the whole thing, start to finish, you're looking at probably about 6 months to get the license before you can buy the gun.
Yeah.
And that's that. Now I'm saying that from a perspective of not having the restricted. I don't know if the restricted adds even more to that.
No, I was reading up on some of this, and it seems like when you apply for, so you go through all the training, you complete that. You don't actually have a license at that point. Is that correct?
Once you complete the training, no, you don't you then have to apply for the license. That training basically gives you the ability to apply for the license.
Yeah. And when you apply for the license, does the RCMP, do the RCMP check in? You said they check your references, but I'm assuming they also do a background check, and do they check into like any past partners you had? I thought I heard something about that too. Or is that just like that is a part of
yes, that is a part of the application process. And if you have separated from someone, you have to put that in.
Okay, so that would be different than your references. So I'm assuming references you would put in as
the reference you'd put in, somebody that knows you and is a friend or a colleague.
Yeah, but on your but on your application, you also have to put in past spouses or partners that you're separated from.
Yep.
Yes. The reason is they can contact
domestic dispute kind of situations. They will contact them to make sure that you are not an abusive spouse or something to that effect. And that, as much as it is an arduous process, that part of it, I don't have a problem with. If there's some reason, like the red flag laws, if there's some reason you shouldn't be an armed person with guns, then fine. That there are valid reasons out there to refuse to allow somebody to have weapons.
Yep. Yeah. None of this is to say that. None of this at this point is really a critique at the process. It's just to highlight the fact that in the States, you just go in, they give a background check, and within a day or two,
that'll vary a little bit state to state,
correct.
But for the most part, many of the states, you don't have to go through training. You don't have to do much of anything other than go in. They will do a background check. That's something that gets
characterized or reported
misrepresented in the media a lot. They do background checks, but usually it'll be a matter of a day and you can get your gun.
Yeah.
And that's without having done any pre-training, any pre-licensing. You can get a gun within a day or two.
And some of these differences are based on the fact that gun ownership is in the U.S. Constitution where it isn't in Canada. So it's a right down there and merely a very restricted privilege in Canada. Yes. And so, that goes a long ways to understanding the differences. And that really has become kind of reflected in the whole culture that they have regarding guns. And so, it's vastly different. It's not, it's nothing close to the simplicity of getting guns in the U.S. versus up here.
So for them to put in additional laws in reaction to shootings in the United States doesn't make any sense, because in Canada, for somebody to legally acquire the guns required to do the same thing that was done in the States is an arduous, difficult process. The background checks, the application process and everything would have probably stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. And I almost wonder, you put in so many restrictions, you're going to force people to look around to get, or look for a way to get around them.
Yeah.
And so they put in all these laws, but the thing is, as Trudeau himself acknowledges, most gun owners use their guns quite lawfully.
Yeah.
In fact, in a CBC article, it mentions that illegal smuggling over the Canada-U.S. border is the source of untold thousands of firearms floating around the country. The U.S. is the source of anywhere from 70 to 99% of the guns, mostly handguns, used in the commission of crimes here, depending on the municipality where the crimes are committed.
Well, yeah, to legally acquire a handgun, this is something I didn't mention, is not only do you need to go through that process of getting the restricted license, you also are required to maintain membership at a range. You can't legally carry that handgun anywhere except your home, to the range or to a gunsmith or to the US border.
Yes.
Otherwise you need special permission to take that gun anywhere. So legally, handguns are practically useless in Canada.
Yeah.
There's virtually nothing you can do with it except go to a range and shoot a target.
Yeah.
You can't you can't go out and shoot a gopher. Like you can't go out and shoot the coyote that's a problem on your farm with a handgun. That's illegal.
I kind of skipped over that. It's like you have all these hoops and applications you have to go through just to get the gun. But once you have the gun, there are just as many restrictions on how it's stored and moved around. This is one reason why Trudeau doesn't. He mentions that again to repeat. It says, but other than using firearms for sport shooting and for hunting, there's no reason anyone in Canada should need guns for their everyday lives. Notice, like, instantly, anyone who has, like, especially an American, they're going to go self-defense.
Yeah, in the U.S., the primary use of a handgun, or other guns, but handguns especially, the primary use is to have in the home for self-defense.
Yeah, but here, as you said, you better be traveling with that gun between your home and the gun range. And I think in one article I read said that God help you if you decide to stop at Tim Hortons for lunch on the way.
Oh yeah, you can't detour at all. Like if you get stopped by a cop with that gun anywhere other than a pretty near direct path between your home and a gun range, you better have a really good explanation because you're going to wind up in some pretty serious trouble.
Yeah. And it has to be stored in the trunk, I believe.
It needs to be in a locked case.
Okay.
Whereas like a rifle, it doesn't need in a vehicle. It doesn't need to be in a locked case.
Okay.
It doesn't need to be locked or the bolt removed or something. Like there are restrictions there, but a handgun is especially bad. To legally transport a handgun, it has to be in a case that is locked.
Yep. And then when it's at home, it has to be stored separate from the ammunition, unloaded, I believe, correct? Yep. There has to be in a safe or trigger guards, or is both and?
I think it's both with a handgun.
And so you can see why this is not very useful for self-defense, right?
Self-defense, by the time you get your handgun out, unlocked, loaded, you're long since gone.
That's insane. It just seems like a fundamental right of being human is to defend yourself. And yet in Canada, if you need that kind of defense, don't worry, just call the government sanctioned police force.
And we've seen Alberta's been a prime example. I'm sure it's a problem elsewhere, but of the increasing rural crime and the situations where calling the police isn't helpful at all.
Of course not. No.
They can come after the fact and they can help try to solve what happened, but that doesn't help you when you're in your home and somebody comes and attacks.
Yeah.
There's been multiple cases of that reported in the last few years where the only option is some form of self-defense, usually with a weapon because the person invading has a weapon.
That's right. Yeah. And even just right here by Penhold, it was just last year that someone had broken into their house and had to defend himself with a firearm. And it wasn't clear that he was going to get cleared on self-defense.
Yeah, fortunately he did, but it's
far from a certainty. In fact, there's another article from CBC on self-defense. Particularly females are carrying, quote, weapons simply in the form of, say, pepper spray, or a knife. That if you're caught, and this is a quote from the police. It says, if the object that you're carrying is intended to cause harm to another individual and is not used as a typical tool, then you can be caught and charged with carrying a concealed weapon. Like that includes knives, that includes pepper spray. I think one picture they showed, someone had like brass knuckles.
Brass knuckles entirely are illegal.
Oh yeah, what else do you use them for, right?
Yeah,
but that's the thing. These are situations you can't even use them in order to protect yourself.
No. And even things as simple as carrying a pocket knife. I often carry a knife as a tool. I use it all the time. It's handy. Right. But carrying a pocket knife, if you can't explain a valid reason for carrying that is not in any way to harm another person, it's a concealed weapon. So that we leave too much into the hands of the cop to decide, well, I don't believe your reason for carrying that is valid, so it's a weapon.
Yeah.
You are now charged with carrying a concealed weapon.
Yeah. So at worst or at best, you're going to get fined.
Yeah.
At worst, like there's jail time for some of these. And then later in that same self-defense article, this is a quote from someone who's actually part of a company that teaches self-defense. Here's a quote. Her name is Lorna Selig. It says, "Everything that we need to defend ourselves, we already have in our bodies. We have our minds, we have our voices, and we have our fists and our feet to fight back."
I
I
cannot handle that quote. That is incredibly bothersome.
Right?
You think like a woman walking down the street, a dark street at night, who's 5'2", and a 6 foot or taller 200-pound guy decides to attack her.
Right.
I don't care how well she's trained in self-defense. There's a good chance he's going to crush her.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
Like,
that's the odds.
you can't say everything we need to defend ourselves we have.
No.
Some people, yes. A properly trained adult male in martial arts can probably defend himself without a weapon.
Yeah, but-
as long as the other person doesn't have a weapon.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is another problem with this
this
quote.
this is the Indiana Jones problem.
You may be able to defend yourself if the other person isn't armed, but the bad guy is not going to follow the law necessarily, and so he's probably going to be armed.
Yeah. Yeah, right. This is and hey, I mentioned this is the Indiana Jones problem. You need to if you bring a sword to a gunfight, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
And especially with and this article is in the context of women carrying these weapons to prevent sexual assault.
Yeah.
And yet this article also seems to say, be careful bringing that self-defense stuff with you. You know,
Yeah.
it could lead to legal issues. Are you insane? Like, yeah, if you are that 5'0" female and you're walking home after the night shift, I completely endorse your I think human right to carry a weapon that equalizes the force that will come at you.
Yeah.
And in many cases, that's what a firearm does.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say pepper spray isn't enough. If
Thank
you're
you,
trying to say
right.
you shouldn't even legally be able to carry pepper spray, well, I'd say pepper spray isn't even enough.
Yeah.
You need to go farther than that.
Anyway, yeah, there are some issues with gun laws and just the whole Canadian view of firearms, especially in the realm of self-defense.
Yeah.
It's incredible. All right. Okay. Quickly. I know I got other things. We still got our big story. We haven't talked to it yet. But cause I want to bring this next story because it touches on firearms related things, and events. So in 2001, the Harper government, put in law that allowed, judges the discretion to stack lifetime sentences. So in Canada, a lifetime sentence is 25 years before your possibility of parole. And before 2011, any life terms would be served concurrently. So you get charged with 3 lifetime sentences. They're all, those 25 years are all just packed into the same time frame.
You don't serve one, then the next, then the next.
Correct.
You're serving them together.
Yeah. So this 2001 or 2011 law allowed them to be served or to be sentenced in a consecutive manner. So you don't get to double up on your time. You got to serve the whole thing.
So you really commit the crime, and it is literally a life sentence.
Yes. And so as you can imagine, this allowed for sentences that went beyond people's natural life.
Yeah.
And so it really became a true lifetime sentence. Well, the lawyers for the Quebec mosque killer from 2017, he went into a Quebec mosque. I forget what city it was in. Probably Montreal, but I'm a little bit of a guess there. And ended up killing 6 and then I think wounding another 6. And he pled guilty to the charges and was sentenced to 40 years in jail. And so this is the Crown wanted 6 lifetime consecutive sentences,
Yeah.
so 150 years.
Yeah.
And they only got 40. And so as a result, both parties appealed the decision.
Yeah,
One wanted more, one wanted less. Well, the lawyers for the murderer challenged the constitutionality of this consecutive lifetime sentences. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has struck down that 2011 bill, ruling it as bringing justice into disrepute, and, quote, they are cruel and unusual by nature, referring to these consecutive lifetime bans. It says they, referring to consecutive sentencings, are intrinsically incompatible with human dignity because of their degrading nature, as they deny defenders any moral autonomy by depriving them in advance and definitively of any possibility of reintegration into society.
I'm of the opinion that if you commit a crime to that degree, you shouldn't be reintegrated into society. I'm kind of tired of this idea that we need to rehabilitate all criminals. There's a certain point where it's not rehabilitation, it's punishment. You need to punish the crime.
Yeah, we'll rehabilitate you after you've after you served your punishment.
Yeah, and if the crime is bad enough, the punishment doesn't leave room for rehabilitation. You have forfeited that ability.
Exactly.
That right.
Yeah. So what this means is that anyone who murders, say, one person or 100, they equally have the opportunity to parole after 25 years. So you get one murder, and then all the rest are just basically bonus.
Yeah.
Like that's really what this law, or what this court ruling is saying. Like that's how despicable this is.
You might as well go out with a bang, because you're going to get the same penalty, the same.
Right. Yeah. There's 25 years before parole. Now they'll argue like, oh, just because you get an opportunity at parole doesn't mean you'll get it. In fact, most don't. I think there's certainly counter examples to that. So that's certainly not a definitive, but far from it. Just the justice issue of it is abhorrent enough that the courts would see it this way. And they also apply this retroactive to 2011.
So people who were sentenced prior.
Yep.
Goodness.
So for example, the person who murdered 3 RCMP officers in 2014, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, 75 years. That's now down to 25 before parole. The guy who ran over 11 people in Toronto with his van in 2000, actually I didn't have to put a year in there, but that was from 5 or 6 years ago now. He's now eligible after 25 years.
Oh man.
So the maximum penalty in Canada for any, like, the most terrible crime you can imagine will only net you 25 years in prison before you get a chance to get out. Doesn't matter yet. That is the weight of the hammer of Canadian justice is 25 years before parole.
And then they try to reintegrate you into society.
Yeah, right. Oh man. This is really kind of unheard of in common law. Like, there are other countries that have kind of a little bit similar to this, but no one struck down this whole consecutive life sentences. Right. In Britain, you can be sentenced this way. There are ways of people kind of getting their sentences commuted, and that kind of came up in the trial, or in the kind of the Supreme Court case, but it says that wasn't enough. The fact that all hope was being removed from these mass murderers was cruel and unjust, or cruel and unusual punishment.
Cruel and unusual to the person who mass murdered. That's not cruel and unusual.
No, I think that's just and fitting. I think those are the adjectives you're looking for. And yeah, for me, when I heard that, like, this, they ruled these unconstitutional because it's a violation of human dignity. For me, I think they got it exactly backwards. It downplays the dignity and the humanity and the value of the victims.
Yeah, and that's the kind of back and forth argument you'd hear back in the days when people were fighting against the death penalty and trying to get it removed, and it was gone from Canada years ago. But
Yeah,
the United
1976.
Yeah, so the United States, quite a few of the states still had it up until recently. I'm not sure where it's left. There's a few that still have it.
There's still a number of them.
But that's always been that argument. Well, you just want to murder the person. No, we see the value in the lives he took.
Yeah.
You're placing the value on the wrong life.
Yeah. When the state kills someone, that's not murder.
No.
When it's done through a due process, that's not murder. That's called justice.
Yeah.
And I think, when we talk about justice, I think most people agree that in a proper system, the scales are balanced. The punishment fits the crime.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The only punishment that balances the scales for me when you go out and murder a human being, there is nothing more egregious. There is nothing more violative of the individual or society. Mm-hmm. That you have forfeited your right to live in this society. Yeah. And this 25 years is just a travesty now in the Canadian justice system. The capital punishment in Canada has been abolished since 76. In fact, we haven't executed anyone in Canada since 62.
Right.
But yeah, I think I know there's no hope of it coming back in Canada anytime soon. But seriously, this is when you see courts do this, it's like, no, then something's wrong with the justice system. We've just gone so soft on recognizing the significance of what is being done in so many of these situations. And then as a final comment on this, the court mentioned that, this was a unanimous decision as well. That the court mentioned that because they're in jail for so long that with no hope of getting out, that this somehow denies, it says, quote, denies defenders any moral autonomy by depriving them in advance and definitively of any possibility of reintegration into society. Basically, to me, it sounds like because you are removing all hope of getting back into society, that's too much. You can't remove the hope of the mass murderer. Okay. And to me, I'm like, okay, yeah, you can. They forfeited that.
Yeah.
But also it's a very secular, materialistic kind of hope. Because you've locked someone away for their entire life, you can't say all hope is gone. Or at least you can only say that in a materialistic way.
Right.
Because, for those who believe in a higher power, who believe that there's God, that there is redemption offered to those who believe, there's much greater hope than just simply reintegration into society. Yeah. This seems like just a shallow view, very materialistic view of hope. In fact, there's many really kind of encouraging cases of people on death row who have become believers, and you see an incredible amount of life and hope in them. They accept their punishment.
That kind of impending death is a pretty sobering thing for a lot of people. Yeah. That it is coming to an end on a specific date.
Yeah.
That gives you time to mentally prepare and know that this is it. I need to figure this out.
Yeah. If nothing else, it gives you impetus to figure out whether or not there is. You better be starting looking for hope other places than simply this world. Yeah. Maybe that is a moral autonomy that the state can't take away from you.
Yeah.
And so that's still another place that these people can be looking. But yeah, this is just a terrible miscarriage of the political or of the justice system. For what it's worth, the conservative candidate Pierre Poilievre has said he's going to use the notwithstanding clause on this if he was prime minister, and just say, nope, we're not going to go by that. The federal government just said, we'll look at it, but they're going to honor it for now. Who knows what this looks like down the road? But at the moment, And it just looks like just a tossing of the scales of justice. But yeah, those I think those are two stories that I think worth spending some time on. All right, so on to our main story, and this is going to be a main story that probably carries over for a few episodes. The no doubt you're aware that June is a very special month of time of the year.
Oh.
as you've probably noticed, an explosion of color around. And I'm not talking about springtime or the flowers. Of course, I'm talking about rainbow flags
Integrated into every logo, every image you see for the next 30 days.
At least 30 days, yeah. So June is Pride Month, and it has been for a number of years now. I think going back at least into the 90s in Canada. But yeah, so you see the pride flag everywhere. The corporate logos are changing everywhere.
That's a more recent development in the last few years, where corporations are adopting this as a marketing tactic.
Yeah, no, this is their sincere beliefs.
Sure it is.
Yeah, it's not about money. What are you talking about? Politicians, of course, are posting their obligatory social media pronouncements. Me being a sports fan, baseball teams everywhere have their pride nights, so that gets advertised all the way up till that week. Strangely though, some of these rainbow colors are absent from the Middle East. I don't know why. I'm just gonna leave that there. But
you won't see the nice Nike swoosh in a rainbow color over in the Middle East.
No, yeah. When you look at these corporate logos on Twitter, their Middle East Twitter handles are strangely ordinary. They don't look as colorful. I don't know. I'm not sure why. But for our purposes, our main story for this month is to focus on the T component of the LGBT alphabet. Of course, T being transgender, and this might seem like, Penhold at least feels small enough that we haven't really had this integrated into our community life yet. And so, there's no pride parades here yet, but nonetheless, some of these events are taking place. So like the FC or FCSS is going to be celebrating Youth Pride Week, coming up next week. So that's going to include, they're going to have a fundraiser for Egal Canada, which is a very powerful LGBT group that has a whole bunch of different branches in support for LGBT, as well as political lobbying and activism in that way. So they're going to be having a fundraiser for that. And then also part of that is that they're going YAC, so this is the Youth Advisory Council, is going to be part of hosting a parent info night on June 8th. And this is put on by the CASASC. And among other things, they're going to be talking about creating safe spaces, learning about allyship, gender identity, and pronouns. And on their Facebook page, saying this is hosted by the town of Penhold along with FCSS. And along with they're also going to be, this is going to be virtual, and they're going to also talk about sexual orientation and gender identity. It says a definition walkthrough, how to be an ally, and importance of language and pronouns. So it's here, like this. Yep. It's seeping in this kind of thinking, and really that's what this is. This is a worldview class, essentially. This is a way of thinking about reality and how to see the world around you. Now, how do we get here to this point? Like, think about where we are. Just think about where we were 15 years ago versus where we are now. Yeah, it's quite a dramatic shift in kind of the cultural mindset regarding these issues.
Yeah.
For example, even the latest U.S. Supreme Court justice, when she was going through her Senate hearings, she could not answer the question, "What is a woman?" She quote is not a biologist. So the person on the U.S. Supreme Court now could not answer that question. In another committee hearing, again in the U.S., a witness testified that a man can have abortions.
Yeah. We live in a society where they try to claim that science is the foundation of all knowledge, and then we're just denying science. Like factual science.
It seems, yeah,
objective
or just
science.
reality. Yeah, you don't have to go too far, and you don't have to be a scientist though. Even
No,
this is just some objective reality things that would seem to be obvious. Again, another pull out of the States, and I don't see why this wouldn't translate into Canada as well. They looked at kind of the self-identification of Americans as LGBT by generation. So it's very revealing. Like there is something going on sociologically here.
Yeah.
That we just can't overlook. Like this is there's something going on. So people born before 1946, 0.8 of them identified as LGBT. The baby boomer generation, so this is people from 46 to 64, it was 2.6%. Generation X from 1960 to 1980, 4.2% identify as LGBT. Millennials, so these are people born between 81 and 96, we're up to 10.5%. And then finally, Generation Z or Generation Z. So these are people born between 1997 and 2003. 20.8% identify as LGBT.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So yeah, we've gone from even people born from 65 to 80 at 4.2 up to 20% in this most recent generation. They're turning 18. There's something going on. Like this you can't dismiss this. And it's something that just calls out for explanation. Like what is going on in the changing, or what's going on in people's mindsets. Like there's no way that people born before 46 were just so suppressed in their LGBT that they wouldn't go out and say it.
Not to that level.
No, like we went from 0.8 to 20%.
Obviously, society was less accepting of that category of the LGBT type people.
Yeah.
So obviously you would see some who would have felt that way and never admitted it, but not to that degree, not going from 0.8% to 20.8%.
Yeah.
That's a lot more.
Yeah. Similarly, we see this similar kind of exponential trend or progression just in the transgender category. Obviously with smaller numbers, it goes from 0.2 in the traditionalists, even 0.1 in the baby boomer generation, up to 2.1% in Generation Z or Generation Z. So there's something going on that we need to pay attention to. Here in Canada, just to give a little bit of Canadian perspective, genderreport.ca says that based on data from several major gender clinics, we now believe that Canada is witnessing a 10 times increase in children and young people being referred for medical transition in the past 10 years. BC Children's Hospital, Sick Kids Hospital, and CHEO, which is the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, are all reporting a 10 times increase in referrals over the past 10 years. At most, the numbers of referrals are doubling every few years, if not faster. Further new clinics have been created in this period. The exponential growth is unprecedented, and they also note the disproportionate amount of Indigenous and young girls that are being referred to these gender clinics. So there is a dramatic cultural shift that's going on.
Yeah.
And it's affecting more and more the younger generation. And as you can see, even younger than this Generation Z, we're looking at kids from 5 to 18. There's just an exponential increase in this transgender thinking. So what is going on there? Like, how do we get to this place? And here I just want to run through some very, I think, interesting background. Like I said, just take your own self back 15 years and and think about how different the world seems back then.
Yeah.
To the kind of thinking we're doing now.
Gay
in
marriage
society.
was still a controversial thing. You wouldn't see it presented much on TV because that was just a little too edgy.
Yeah.
It was still kind of a taboo subject. And yeah, maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I want to say 2004
Was
around
about the
2004 when it
legalization.
was started legalized.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in 2002, the House of Commons still voted to ratify or to recognize the traditional marriage.
Yeah.
So like this is not ancient history, but the thinking that has brought us here has developed over time. It hasn't just poofed out of into existence. And so bear with me. I hopefully you find this interesting as much as I do. To kind of find this kind of idea where this idea thread kind of has woven itself through history to find or to reach us today. And it kind of starts back in the industrialization as kind of factories were being implemented. It really supplanted the kind of the home cottage industry in which women played a very central role in. Dorothy Sayers was an English crime novelist, poet, and just to give you a sense of her intelligence, she translated Dante. So yeah, we were thinking like Paradise. No, not Paradise. That's John Milton.
Dante's Inferno.
Dante's
yeah.
Inferno. Yeah, Purgatory and Paradise. I think something like that. But yeah, that's impressive ability to translate that. But anyway, so she writes this in 1939. I think it really is a kind of an interesting look at how central women were in kind of the, if you will, the economic life of their home, but even just in the society in which they were in. She writes this in 1939, looking back to kind of how the women's role has changed through industrialization. Quote, "It is a formidable list of jobs. The whole of the spinning industry, whole of the spinning industry, the whole of the dyeing industry, the whole of the weaving industry, the whole catering industry, and which would not please Lady Astor, perhaps, the whole of the nation's brewing and distilling, all the preserving, pickling, and bottling industry, all the baking, curing." And since in those days a man was often present from home for months together on absent from home for months together on war or business, a very large share of the management of landed estates. Where are the women's jobs? Here are the women's job. And what has become of them? They are being handled by men. It is all very well to say that a woman's place is the home. But modern civilization has taken all these pleasant and profitable activities out of the home, where women look after them, and handed them over to big industry to be directed and organized by men at the head of large factories. Even the dairymaid in her simple bonnet has gone to be replaced by a male mechanic in charge of a mechanical milking plant.
That's an interesting thing to think about. How much like the traditional idea of the woman in the home. But the woman in the home was a way different role,
right?
Prior to industrialization.
Yeah, we kind of have that whole Leave It to Beaver thinking of or when we think about kind of the old fashioned view of women, we go back to the 1950s view.
They cooked, they cleaned.
Yeah,
they always had a smile on their face.
That's right, and yet that in itself is not really a traditional role per se.
That's a pretty short time frame in history that was the traditional role, so to speak.
And so as that list, I think hopefully clarifies, it wasn't just feeding and looking after kids. You had an instrumental role in kind of the economic life of your family and the breadwinning of what was going on. I throw this in as well is that even when the industrialization took place, of course, with the factories, coal was required. And so a whole bunch of coal mines obviously sprung up and exploded. And many women were involved in the labor that was required to mine coal. but English law quickly adapted it, or quickly changed to kind of push women out of it, because they saw kind of the working conditions, the men at fault as well, the masculine environment, the rough and tumble kind of environments, and they didn't think that this was really the place for for women, let's just say. And so as there's like, in fact, I was reading one account of a woman, she was writing, I think, in her diary or something like that. She was working while pregnant. She gave birth on a Saturday and was back in the mine on Friday. Like that was what the laws were trying to address. Part of that. So they recognized that the women, this might not be the best place for women. Now, you can disagree or not with that, but nonetheless, what it did is it pushed women further out of kind of the economic workings of society, because now she goes home, but it's not the home she left.
Yeah.
All that work has now been outsourced to these factories. And so it went towards making, or instilling this idea that the women's place was at home looking after kids. And it really ended up kind of also lending itself to this perceived, to decreasing women's decreasing the role that women had in society, or the importance they had in society. This was man's work over here. Now we've looked after it. You can go home and look after the kids. And that kind of mentality is kind of what was seeped in, and that kind of starts forming what our 1950s view of the woman's role is. And so it's kind of in reaction to that we get the first wave feminism, is that they see kind of women being sidelined in society, and so they start wanting to fight for equal human rights. So we're looking at the time frame of about 1850 to 1920. Is kind of the category here, the timeline that's kind of given here. And so in many cases, when a woman got married, she lost kind of her rights as a citizen, or certain rights to property. Obviously voting rights was a huge issue during this time. Right to self-govern, autonomy, everything seemed to go through the man. And so the woman was kind of in the background. And so a lot of women started pushing back against this. In fact, it goes back into the early 1700s with Mary Wollstonecraft. She was an English writer and philosopher, and she was an advocate for women's liberty, and she actually had a bit of a soft spot for kind of the French Revolution, at least before it got really bloody. I think she liked the whole equality movement that was kind of the premise of some of the French Revolution, though. It got, like I said, it got a little extreme.
It went a little off the rails.
It went. But she was at least nuanced, and she had nuanced support for that. But she was arguing that these natural rights should be applied equally to women. That these rights aren't sexed. They aren't quote man's rights. They are man's rights, human rights now in today's terminology. And many cases, why women were were believed to be inferior was largely out of lack of education, lack of training, lack of opportunity, much of which would be lost even more as things were ramped up in the industrialization. Yeah. Even though Wollstonecraft here is writing in the late 1700s, so even before the whole industrialization really takes off, she's already arguing some of these cases. She writes that, quote, "Till women are more rationally educated, the progress in human virtue and improvement in knowledge must receive continual checks." So there's humanity itself is going to be constrained, pulled back until everyone, women included, are allowed to participate fully in society. That was her kind of argument that she was making. And so this got carried on through, and it's okay. Here's a little interesting tidbit. Mary Wollstonecraft, she died 11 days after giving birth to her second daughter. Her second daughter was Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've talked about Frankenstein before, the movie,
Yeah.
and kind of how it's the interesting takes on women's and this the kind of erasure of women that were kind of that was kind of in some embedded in some of the ideas of Frankenstein creating life, absent of the female. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, there's a little historical connection there. But anyways, so the first wave feminism wanted women to be treated equal with men, um, and this kind of culminates in women getting the right to vote. Most of these dates are kind of going to be based on kind of the U.S. position of things. So this ends around 1920. So this leads into second wave feminism now. So this starts around 1949 to 1980. And the shift here though is it goes from women wanting to have equal rights with men to women wanting the same roles as men.
Right.
And that's going to be a critical distinction, because in doing so, they're going to see their role as a wife or mother as an oppressive thing, as something that doesn't make them equal with men.
Yeah.
So we're going to start to see this disassociation between the biological sex and the social construct of gender. And we'll flesh all these terms out as we kind of go. But I think you'll see this as we read through some of these some of the advocates, some of this quote second wave feminism. And one of the main proponents here is Simone Beauvoir. She was a French existentialist, philosopher, writer, feminist activist. And she wrote in 1949 a book called The Second Sex. And where that comes from, it comes from this quote here, or at least kind of the idea of what she means by that. It says, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. No biological, psychological, or economic fate determines the figure that the human female presents in society. It is a civilization as a whole that produces this creature, immediate between male and eunuch, which is described as feminine." So the second sex is this kind of second tier person, below male. And notice what she says. And so this what a woman is not, it's not connected to biology or psychology. There's nothing that biology says this is what you have to be as a woman. There's no biological connection there. Psychological, economic, nothing about those things says that you as a human female have to move in this direction.
Right.
It's saying all everything that we consider female, or everything we consider feminine. So the fact, that we consider pink and associate that with females, Simone Beauvoir here would say, that is just simply cultural and society putting that on women.
Right.
And so think about what that's doing. It's saying that even your biological, as a woman, your biological ability to reproduce should have no impact upon what it means to be a woman. It's not determinative. Everything is kind of the society and culture, and so any significance that we put on to reproduction is society's
Right.
mindset being placed on there. Now, so that was in 1949. In 1970, we got a radical second wave feminist, Shulamith Firestone. She's actually born in Ottawa, and she's born to Orthodox Jewish parents. In fact, her mother had fled from Germany as a Jew prior to or during World War I or during World War II to escape the Nazis. She wrote a book called The Dialectic of Sex, and she in 1970 she dedicated it to Simone Beauvoir. And in it, she really, you really see her influence, or that she's being influenced by this kind of Marxist ideology in which you basically have two classes, the oppressor and the oppressed. Now, for Marx, he put it in economic terms. What she's going to do is she's going to put it in the sexual terms, if you will,
Right.
gender terms. So she, and again, this is quoting from her book. It says, and just as the end goal of socialist revolution was not only the elimination of the economic class privilege, but of the economic class distinction itself, so the end goal of the feminist revolution must be like that of the first feminist movement, not just the elimination of male privilege, but of sex distinction itself. Genital differences between human beings would no longer matter culturally. So
So men and women are,
your biology makes no difference.
you are really the absolute same in society.
Yeah, and any differences are simply cultural. And we're gonna create a culture in which men and women are equal. Biology, be darned. Excuse my language. And she goes on later on that quote talking about ways, and this is kind of interesting. Because this is in 1970. But she goes on to kind of talk about ways in which reproduction can be outsourced from the female body. So you have, artificial wombs, or at least maybe a way that men could do it. And so you would get rid of this oppressing component of biology, this thing that separates men and women.
The most remarkable thing about the woman's body, the ability to reproduce, to create human life, and she just wants to outsource that to lab test tubes and stop having to do that.
So she mentions that it's through these artificial methods of reproduction, she says, quote, the tyranny of the biological family would be broken. And so you see this in a lot of these feminists, is that even the kind of the hierarchy inside families is an issue.
Yeah.
So, the fact that parents rule over their children, or that children are taught to obey their parents, that's an issue. That's creating an inequality.
Oy.
Yeah. So, so it goes so far, and here's another quote from Beauvoir, that it's not so much that they want women to have a choice. That's oftentimes how it's framed. The feminist movement, they just want women to have the choice to be equal with men and do everything that men are able to do. What Beauvoir though was concerned about is that too many women would choose to be mothers or wives.
Yeah, they don't want women to choose the role of the mother, the stay-at-home mom, the housewife. They don't want that.
Yeah, that reinforces cultural inequalities, cultural oppression. In fact, she's quoted as saying, this is Simone Beauvoir again, she's quoted as saying, no woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children. Society should be totally different. Women should not have that choice, precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will make that one. It is a way of forcing women in a certain direction.
But why do you think too many women would make that choice?
Because they've been indoctrinated with the cultural mindset that this is what women are supposed to do. Like this is not, these are not outlier thinkers. These are people at the heart of the feminist movement. There's other ones called, Betty Friedan is another one you can maybe look into. But the key here that what this, starting with the kind of this feminist movement, the point of doing this to get to the transgender issue and then make the connection to the transgender issue is the fact that it's in the feminist movement we started to initially see the separation of biology and gender. Yeah. We started to see that what your biological sex was had no bearing, or should have no bearing, on what you did as a man or a woman.
Yeah.
And so we start to see that come into play in the feminist movement, and they start to get support from another professor who's looking particularly at that issue of gender and biology, by the name of Dr. John Money. And he was initially born in New Zealand, actually, but he ended up serving as the psychiatry professor at Johns Hopkins University. I believe it's in Boston, during the 50s and 60s. And if you want to know where the terms such as gender identity, gender role, sexual orientation come from, it's all this guy. Him. This guy, he coined it. And even the term gender itself is a term that he is primarily credited with in using in its particular form now. before John Money, when you use gender, you usually used it in connection to or referring to grammatical terms. So just
Yeah.
like Spanish and French have gendered terms, that's where you would find it.
Yeah, it's confusing hearing that now because of the way it's been used in the context of gender versus sex. Now you hear a gendered language, and we've got a confusion,
flip it
especially in the
around.
English language. Now we hear that, and it's confusing because gender has now come to mean how you identify
Yep.
yourself. Like, I don't even know how to say it. It's just the whole thing is weird.
The way that Money changed it, he moved it from being about just being a grammatical linguistic term to being a term referring to the social construct of what it meant to be a man or woman.
Yeah.
And so you can see how far that's gone out from there. And much of that change comes from his study during the 1960s, or at least got started in the 1960s. It was known at the time as the John Joan experiment. Later now, we know the two twin boys involved in this study were initially named Bruce and Brian. Now, this study has really become infamous for the just the despicable nature of it. So Bruce and Brian were born in 1966 in Winnipeg, and when they're 7 years old, or 7 months old, they were having a medical issue that it was recommended that they go through with circumcision. So it wasn't a religious thing; it was to solve a medical issue. Bruce went through, at 8 months old, his parents brought the twins to get circumcised, and unfortunately, during the circumcision process, Bruce's penis was burned beyond surgical repair.
Ooh.
So yeah, like just imagine you as a parent having this take place. Like, what do you do next? Like,
Yeah.
this is going to mean a radical change in how this person grows up and
Yeah.
lives. And so, so that's what this, obviously after that happened to Bruce, they didn't go through with it with Brian. The medical condition cleared. So now these young twins, the parents are wondering what they do. On CBC, they saw CBC had a program during the 1960s known as "This Hour Has 7 Days," kind of a news, Dateline, 60 Minutes kind of program, as far as my understanding goes. And on one of those episodes, they interviewed John Money, and he was considered a pioneer in sexual development and gender identity. And so Bruce and Brian's parents brought them to Money. Now, Money was already convinced that how you perceive yourself, your gender, can be completely changed based upon your cultural and upbringing. Sorry. And then this family comes along with two young twins, and it provides just the perfect subjects to test out his theory. You have young kids who have the same genetic code, who are going to be raised in the same environment, and so you have the perfect environment to test out your theory of whether or not one becomes a female simply through one's upbringing, one's cultural identity, or perception. So he recommends sex reassignment surgery. And so this involved, but yeah, it's uncomfortable, but he recommended, and they went through with it. The testes were removed from Bruce. A primitive female looking genitalia were fashioned. And they changed Bruce's name to Brenda. And later on, they would begin cross hormone treatment with estrogen. And so they would come back year after year down the money to see how they are going on. The parents going along with the quote, the experts recommendation, raised their twin boys now as or one son and one daughter.
Yeah.
Now, in order to kind of reinforce the gender, the female gender into Bruce, who's now known as Brenda, or who's being called Brenda, Money forced the brothers to simulate sex acts on each other and inspect each other's genitals, starting at the age of 6. And he thought this was, the key way or key element to kind of their gender development. By the time, however, Bruce Brenda was 14, he was at the point of suicide. He was so depressed, and it's only at that point did his parents come out and tell him.
Horrible.
And so he ended up changing his name to David, and then had reconstructive surgery. But of course, there's no going back.
No.
Now, and so sadly, Brian overdosed in 2002, and then David committed suicide in 2004. And their parents blamed money for their upbringing. Like, he traumatized these kids in service to this gender theory that he had. Now, the whole time though, he's publishing stories and railing on about how successful his experiment has been going on. So this goes on from about 1966 to 1980. Bruce and David and Brian's story doesn't come out until 1997, when they finally have the mental fortitude to talk about it. So it's not until 1997 this comes out. But nonetheless, this experiment becomes well known and becomes the basis for the gender identity thinking that we see now.
Which is incredibly disturbing, knowing what the result of this theory was.
The origins, yeah. And how far, and yeah. And so he, John Money, he helps form or create the John Hopkins Gender Identity Clinic in 1967. He's a pioneer in sex reassignment surgery. And we see how his thinking in 1960s and his John Jones experiment, how that has impacted the rest of society going forward now. Just an example, we see an explosion in these clinics. In 2007, the Boston Children's Hospital begins its first program to focus on transgender issues in children and adolescents. And then 10 years later, there's 45 of them spread out throughout the U.S. Even the American Psychiatric Association, this is their definition, and this is their definition. So of sex and gender, and see how this doesn't reflect a merging of kind of what has started as this whole feminist movement and John Money's view of gender. So the APA, so this is the professionals. This is the association, or American Psychiatric Association, or Psychology Association. Sex, this is their definition. Sex is assigned at birth. Refers to one's biological status as either male or female, and is associated primarily with physical attributes such as chromosomes, hormone prevalence, and external and internal anatomy. Gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for boys and men, or girls and women. These influence the way that people act, interact, and feel about themselves. While aspects of biological sex are similar across culture, aspects of gender may differ. So look, you read that, there's no connection between your sex and your gender. Sex is your biological state, and gender is your socially is a social construct that you've kind of internalized.
And now the medical science has reached the point where they feel they can do something about it. They can fix the sex problem.
They fix the biological component, and this is the swap that is happening now. Is that your biological sex is objective. Like, no one has to tell you in 99.99% of the cases what your sex is. You don't have to tell someone that.
Yeah.
That's just objective reality.
Yeah.
Your gender identity, though, that's completely internal. according to this.
Yeah.
And completely separate. Your biological makeup has no bearing on your gender identity. It's all internalized from culture and your own sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done now in what we're seeing with the treatment is no longer do we care necessarily about your biological sex. What becomes ultimate now is your internalized subjective sense of your gender.
Yeah.
That becomes kind of the, if you will, the objective, unchanging fact.
And you
And
fix
you
the
fix
other.
the other thing, the biological. And this kind of mentality is what we're seeing in these classes now, like that's going to be taught virtually through the Pennold YAC about, pronouns. We see this in bathrooms, sports participation,
Mm-hmm.
even in jails.
Oh yeah.
It goes extreme. Our own Chinook's Edge school division has this in their policy, is that you have to respect the gender identity of someone. There's even confusion, though, I think, in their own policy. This is from their policy. It says transgender individuals normally identify with a gender that is different from the one they were assigned at birth. So here,
Even
gender is assigned, but then the very next line, and as I was reading through it, says they define what transsexual is: a person whose gender identity differs from the sex assigned at birth. So there's confusion even in that, and it's not surprising. These policies were so rushed on so fast. Like they germinated for a while, but they just sprung up full fledged now. That school policies they can't even get it straight. They're just trying to follow along with kind of the cultural flow. And then we've talked about this before as well. The Canadian government itself has got so far that not only does your gender identity kind of trump your objective biological sex when it comes to how the world should see you, it's become harmful now to think that one should recognize their biological sex as having any significance. This is in reference to the federal government instituting their conversion therapy ban.
Yep.
In the preamble, it says, whereas conversion therapy causes harm to society because, among other things, it is based on and propagates myths and stereotypes about sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, including the myth that heterosexuality, cisgender, gender identity, and gender expression that conforms to the sex assigned to the person at birth are to be preferred over other sexual orientation, gender identities, and gender expressions. We'll get into this. But this kind of thinking here, it's wrong to think that your gender identity should have any connection to your biological sex.
Yeah.
In fact, if anything, your biological sex now needs to be altered to match your gender identity. In fact, that's what the conversion therapy ban. That's the only thing that can't. It's the only direction it can go in now.
Yeah.
Is your biological has to be adapted to your gender.
Yeah. If somebody has an issue, gender dysphoria, as we used to refer to it, you can help them fix the physical side. You can't help them fix the psychological side.
Yeah, because there is no problem with the physical or with the psychological side, as according to this thinking.
So yeah, it's a one-way street in a direction that has some pretty dangerous ramifications.
And we'll look at that in upcoming episodes related to kind of the social and medical consequences of this thinking, of this connection between biology and gender. And just a final quote here, I think that just kind of summarized nicely where we are. It comes from a book called When Harry Became Sally by Ryan T. Anderson. He writes that feminism originally sought to liberate women from a restrictive understanding of gender and free them to be themselves, but it turned into a movement seeking to make women the same as men. That's the distinction between first and second wave feminism there. Our culture has gone from the error of exaggerated and rigid sex stereotypes to the opposite error of denying that there are any important differences between the sexes. From that error comes the culture of androgyny and gender confusion. The feminist aim of erasing all differences between men and women might seem contrary to the transgender insistence that the inner self of a distinctly male or female gender identity cannot be altered by therapy, though beneath it all is a delinking of gender from our biological nature. And it's that disconnect that delinking, he says, that we'll look at in our next episode, because right now there's only one direction treatment can go. If you bring in your son or daughter, 6 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old, if you bring them into a therapist and you say that this person is having gender issues, gender dysphoria, they're not feeling quite right, this is someone who needs help, and we should have sympathy for them. It's not. Most of us have no concept of this feeling.
Yeah.
But if you don't feel right in who you are, that's something that needs to be addressed. So none of this is to say that these people need to be pushed to the sidelines or dismissed or don't exist. They need help. We should encourage them and be supporting them in this. The problem is, though, right now there's only one avenue of treatment for them, and we'll get to it.
Keep pushing them along the path.
You keep pushing them along their gender identity, and you bring in the biological with them, with tragic consequences, I think, over time. Yeah. So that gives you hopefully a little bit of a background to how we got to this point. Why or where did we disconnect gender and identity? How did gender become the kind of trump card, the supremacist or the supreme determiner of who we are, with no reference, no concern for biological sex? It's been a long time coming, but it's certainly just crashed on the beach now.
Yeah.
Of society, and so many people are being swept up in it, and much of it, I think, is in the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you see this hit in pop culture, and maybe we'll look at this a little bit next time as well. Pop culture in the last 10, 15 years, with celebrities going through these changes, it affects people.
And now it's prevalent in the media we're consuming, and it's right there in their face all the time.
Yeah.
Right from a young age.
Yeah. That's the thing. The society says this, talking about this in any kind of negative light is just, you become a social pariah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we haven't quite got there. We just kind of laid the background history for this, but in going forward, we'll talk about things that probably don't get brought to public light enough.
Yeah.
When people are going through this. But yes, thank you for putting up with this. I know we've gone long. The quick and dirty of it, just to completely swap subjects now. Go see Top Gun Maverick. Is worth it. It has really clunky dialogue to get started, but the dog fights, the aerial footage, the sound design, go see it in theaters. You have to see it on the big screen. It is truly just a cinematic, truly a noteworthy cinematic achievement in what they were able to capture on film, and put you right in the cockpit of these amazing pilots and then actors as they're going through it. Like, their faces are being pulled off their bodies through real G-forces.
Yeah.
Yes. Tom Cruise does not always look so great when he's pulling 8 Gs. So yeah. I definitely recommend it. But so yeah, thank you for sticking along and hanging along with us throughout this. Hopefully this gives you some background to some of these important issues. As always, feedback. Love to hear your thoughts on some of these, whether you knew some of this background information or not. Let us know what you're thinking as you're going through this. But in the meantime, my name is Brian Constantine.
And I'm Michael Rowland.
And this has been Penhold Talk Radio.